So I stay in a small town in the southwest of Scotland. One of those towns where if you don't know someone, you'll definitely know one of their friends. In 2015, I moved into a flat with my 2 children and partner. The flat seemed nice, and in a quiet part of town. Needless to say, we were all really happy with the move. At the time, my eldest son, Sam, was 4, and my youngest, Mark, was 3. Soon after moving in, I started noticing strange things happening. For example, the washing machine started turning itself on and off, and doors began opening on their own. The strangest, though, is yet to come. One night when the kids were in bed, about 6 months after moving in, Sam came running through to the living room and said, "Daddy, could you please come and tell the hand in my room to stop trying to play with my teddy bears?" So naturally, I went into his room and told this, what I thought was imaginary, hand off. Around about 2 weeks later at work, a colleague asked me, "Did you know in April 2014 a young guy hung himself in your flat?" I was gobsmacked, because the night before, Sam had come and told me. Dad, do you know there's a ghost in the attic? What blows my mind is my 4-year-old had never talked about ghosts before moving here. At the time, he didn't know what an attic or loft was, and it turned out that after me doing some digging and speaking to a friend who is a local police officer, that the guy was found hanging in the attic. We still stay here to this day, and strange things happen from time to time. The latest being the TV turning itself on and up to full volume on its own with only me in the flat at the time. My youngest son, Mark, however, has never mentioned anything ghostly. It's all very strange and very real. I've lived in a very active house for quite some time. This house is off the hook with paranormal activity. From EVPs to hundreds of orbs, there are tons of stories and photos I'll upload at some point. But since I'm a little short on time today, I just wanted to tell you a story from about 12 years ago. I was sitting in the front room of our home on the sofa reading a book. It was a nice summer day, but not too hot. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, I got the strangest feeling. It was like that feeling you get in dreams when things look normal, but you're very aware that you're not in your normal life. It was the strangest, most surreal feeling ever. At first, I was going to brush it off as being tired. However, pretty soon I was completely unable to explain it away. Everything I'm about to tell you happened more or less at the same time, within about 3 seconds. But I remember it in slow motion. First, the sofa cushion next to mine indented, and I was very aware of the fact that someone had sat next to me. I heard the clanking of a teacup and saucer, and the woman who sat beside me laughed. Obviously, I didn't know it was a woman until she laughed, but she had the softest, most calming voice. Almost at the same time, I became aware of smells like cigar smoke, teas I didn't own but that smelled lovely, and sounds like background chatter. Kind of like when you're at a church gathering or some low-key party. It wasn't loud, It was just consistent, muffled chatter with a few light bursts of laughter here and there, more clanking, some old-time music. Then the woman next to me spoke to someone who must have been on the opposite side of her from where I was sitting, based on the way it sounded. And she said, "I know, isn't she just lovely? This is so lovely." And then the voice said, in my direction, "You are just delightful." In an instant, it all went back to normal. But for the brief period of time that it was going on, I felt like I was straddling two dimensions. I didn't feel frightened at all. I felt very comforted by the experience for some reason. But at the same time, it was one of the single most bizarre incidents I've ever had. Not the scariest or most dramatic, but definitely one of the most surreal. So this was quite a while back, when I was around 12 or 13. I am now 17. My dad lived in a different house from me and my mom, and he was finally settling in. I was staying over for the night on the weekend, as I would regularly do. We both acknowledged that the kitchen was weirdly designed, and by that I mean that the counters were placed in odd places, so you'd have to walk around them, kind of like you were in a maze, with the fridge right at the end, that would then lead into a garage, if that makes sense. Whenever I would stay, I would always feel odd and on edge for some reason. I could never get comfortable and relax. I always felt as if I was being watched of some sort. Even thinking about it now, I get a weird feeling through my body. The room I stayed in had a double bed, red walls, a walk-in closet, and a mirror going from the floor to the ceiling. Just a normal room. But for whatever reason, that's the room I would feel uneasy in, like something was in there with me. I never said anything though because I was only young and thought it was just me. I hated sleeping in there on my own, and would always be scared to open my eyes at nighttime in case I would see something. My dad also had a double bed, but both beds were already in the house when he bought it. The spare room had a single bed in there, but I don't remember much of it as I hardly went in there. But while we lived there, he said nothing about seeing or feeling anything unusual. Fair enough. He's an extremely laid-back, chilled person, so even if he had, he'd have brushed it off no problem. And while I was visiting, I never experienced seeing anything. Just feeling uncomfortable and on edge all the time. However, about a year once he'd moved out, I was staying with him and his now fiancée and her child. I'll name her child S. And at the time she was around 7 or 8. So still quite young. We had to go over to his old place as he had tenants living there that needed their bath sorted out. They had kids of their own, so me and S would end up playing with them to keep ourselves company. Normal stuff. I still felt the exact same feeling I had when I used to stay there before. So by the time we were leaving, we were all standing in the hallway waiting to leave with the stairs to our left. As soon as we went through the door, the stairs were right in front of you or a doorway to the left to go into the bottom floor of the house. While the adults were chatting, I noticed a dark, gray figure move across the top of the stairs and go into my old room. I'll admit, it made me freeze for a second. and I looked down at S and asked her if she had seen it too. She said she had, and we both just looked at each other and back up the stairs. I was a major wussbag back then, so I didn't go upstairs to look. But I know I wouldn't have seen anything anyway. If it was something paranormal, they never show up when you want them to or on command. But I kept staring upstairs until the adults stopped talking and my dad told us it was time to leave. When we got in the car, we were quietly talking about it to each other. It's nothing extreme, and it could have been nothing at all. But considering 2 people had seen it, I feel like maybe it was actually something. I can't remember if this was late 2017 or mid 2018 due to my photos being everywhere and the dates being mixed up, but I'm pretty sure this was Halloween or near Halloween of 2017. I had already moved out of home and was now living about 20 minutes down the road in another area of the beach. My friend at the time was getting ready to go meet up with someone, and being that I was single at the time, I decided to do the same as, like I said, it was almost Halloween. I did not know this person well, and back then I was kind of oblivious to the dangers of Tinder, etc., although nothing bad had happened when I went out with him. So we had made plans to go to a Halloween tour out in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond is where the Civil War had taken place decades ago. We went to Williamsburg, to be specific. Old Town. He lived about an hour from me, and it was about an hour and a half drive to get to our destination. We arrived and went to pay the tickets as soon as we could, being the tours were already starting. To set the record straight, I was super attracted to this guy, so that would explain some of the things unrelated in this story. We followed behind a couple tours as people were walking around. The tour guides told us stories of the Civil War, the horrible things that had happened, ghost stories, and even showed us a street that they told us used to flood with blood back in the days of the war. We listened to multiple stories and then took off on our own to less populated areas and looked around at the old buildings and such. At some point, we had snuck off and hid in a dark alley to make out, and things had almost gotten a little wild during that makeout session, so we stopped out of fear of getting caught. We then sat at one of the tables in a quiet and empty area in the dark and just started talking before he had walked me to the bathroom. I went in, and as I sat down I realized it was empty, but I felt like there was someone in the stall next to me the entire time. I had a horrible, eerie feeling since the night had gotten darker and it felt like we were being watched the whole time. But I freaked out and hurried to leave the bathroom. I told him what had happened as we started heading towards some bigger, older-looking buildings to explore some more. He told me that he had seen a shadow in one of them. We were basically exploring the whole area, up until there was roughly an hour left for all tours before they started shutting things down and everyone had to leave. This is the moment that I will always remember. We headed off toward where the old houses were, where the guides had told us stories of children being kidnapped and things like that. The road was empty, and we were the only 2 there. We walked up to one of the houses. It was fairly big, about 3 stories high, and none of the lights were on in any of those houses, so it's safe to assume there's also none of the people who worked there inside anywhere either. He ran up to the window of the house and knocked on it. I looked back and saw him in a panicked and rushed run toward me. He told me he had seen a figure in the window looking back at him. Not even a good 2 seconds later, all the lights, and not just that house, but every house on that road, had turned on. And as if that wasn't bad enough, we saw the figures in the window, and the war siren from back in the war days sounded. It went from the house we were standing at and rung out all the way down the street of houses before stopping. Our bones were chilled, and we hauled ass back to find our car. I've been reading a bunch of stories on here and remembered these experiences I had as a 5 or 6-year-old. Bear with me. I know I shouldn't be able to remember that far back, but this creeped me out to this day. I usually slept in my own room before I became a paranoid child. I had a twin-size bed in my old house. The door to my room was about 10 feet to the left of my bed. Between the ages of 5 and 6, maybe 7, I had numerous experiences with 2 different, I don't want to say ghosts, demons. I really don't know. It started after what I thought was just a disturbingly vivid, recurring dream. I'm a lucid dreamer, and when I was little, I would wake up by screaming. This might sound funny, but when I did, a skeleton head would appear out of nowhere and shake me until I woke up. It went like this. It would either be late evening or midnight, and the fish nightlight I had would be a little dimmer than usual. I was always freezing cold, but not winter cold. Like that cold you get when you're playing frisbee on a cool summer day. A chilly arm cold. I would always hear a creepy hum, like 10 seconds before she showed up. A lady. A tall, thin, hunched-over lady wearing a dress in a color I couldn't identify would open the door. Her hair would be covering her face. She would walk around for a bit and I would just sit, like literally frozen in fear. Anytime I would try to scream, nothing came out, and she would notice and jump at me. I would always wake up in a cold sweat. That kept happening for about a year. It slowed down after 6 months because of one occurrence. It was like an out-of-body experience, but with ghosts. I would start in my parents' bedroom and float over down the hallway to my room. I would float up until I was right above my bed. And I saw a shadow of a man, like he was made of nothing. He was like 8 feet tall, and his arms went down to his knees. He was almost twig thin, and he was bald. He was looking down at my body like he was checking to see if I was okay. And he stiffened up after a few seconds, and slowly looked up to where I was, Dream Me. He had no face. After that, I woke up. When I was about 9, a few months before we moved, my dad told me he had met a woman who knocked on our door for no reason. She told him 2 people had died in our house. One, a dude who had a heart attack, and the other, a woman who fell down the stairs and broke her neck. I cannot make this shit up. I'm now in 8th grade, and I need answers to what the hell this could be. Edit. He had white eyes, if that helps. I'm from an extremely rural area in eastern Kentucky. I grew up in the woods, last house on my gravel road. I lived up there with my grandparents for most of my childhood, and the other part with my mom next door. Living with my grandparents, they would sleep separately. They both snored and would keep each other awake. So me and my little sister would sleep with my mama. My mama's bedroom was at the back right of the house, and the windows faced the woods. The side of the bed I slept on was the side closest to the windows, and in the summer we would sleep with them up and a screen in it and the blinds up too, so that I could lay there and just stare outside at night into the darkness, which I did many a night. So many times laying there, I would just stare, almost paralyzed. I couldn't close my eyes. I would feel something watching me from the top of the hill. I would hear what sounded like chainsaws and growling. I heard this so many times. I would go to school absolutely exhausted because I could never go to sleep. After I got a little older, I started sleeping on the couch in the living room. In the living room, they have a huge bay window that faced the front yard. The front yard kind of goes down a slope, and there's a huge, probably 200-year-old oak tree. I ended up doing the same thing, staring into the dark, on many nights from that location, knowing that something was watching me from under the tree. Some nights I would just lay there and cry, knowing that unless it stopped looking at me, I wasn't going to go to sleep anytime soon. By the time I was around 12, we started staying with my mom again. Her double wide was right beside my grandparents'. There was a field in between, and we had a path that we would walk back and forth any time, day or night. I would walk home late sometimes, and something would follow me on the path. I didn't feel like it would hurt me, but I also didn't feel like it liked me either. In the double wide, we had 3 bedrooms. Mine and my sister's were on the opposite side of the house from my mom's master bedroom and bathroom. Our side of the trailer was always really cold. We usually slept with my mom after her and my dad divorced. My mom is epileptic, so besides it being cold in our bedroom, we could also keep an eye on her because at the time she was having a lot of seizures from stress. I would sleep on the right side of the bed facing the bathroom. We always kept that door open, so I could always look into it. I can't tell you how many times I laid there at night, and by the dim of the nightlight I would see a woman sitting in the floor in front of the toilet, whimpering, in the fetal position. I would wake my mom up and tell her, but she would just tell me to go to sleep. I think my sister saw her once. In the summer when it was warm, sometimes we would sleep in our bedrooms, and I would see troll-like creatures in my closet. I would close my closet door, but by morning it would be cracked open. To this day, I have dreams about that closet. I dream that I walk into it, and it's like it was before it got repossessed. Half of my clothes were hanging, clothes that I had grown out of and just left in the back. Some old toys would be laying around. But there would be a door at the end of the closet. It was a walk-in closet. I would go through the door, and it would be a hallway with a few doors on either side. But at the end of the hallway, there was a TV in a room with a blue light coming from it, with a small, fat man sitting in front of it. He reminded me of Danny DeVito, but he looked really mean. Back to my grandparents' house. I'm not the only one that has witnessed to things in their house. After my mom's trailer got repossessed, she was in the bathroom getting ready for work one morning. My pap would take my mama to work every morning around 6:30, so by the time that he got back, we were ready to get on the school bus. My mom thought that he had come back home earlier than usual. She hadn't been up long and was just getting ready to get in the shower. She heard my papa open the door, sit down in his recliner, and pop it open and grab his spit bottle. She said, "That was quick." No reply. She went in there, and there was no one. My grandma has also seen red lights drift around the house room to room before. My mom and mama were sitting in the living room one night and said that they saw a man run from bedroom to bedroom in his underwear like he was trying not to get caught. My grandpa was in the recliner asleep. Okay, so, present day. My little sister recently got married and bought a trailer and placed it in the exact same spot that we had our double wide when we were younger. It wasn't even a week after they moved in that stuff started happening. My brother-in-law was getting ready to take their dog outside to use the bathroom when the dog started going crazy. He was in the living room trying to get the dog ready to go outside when he said that he saw a black shadow go into the back bedroom. The dog bolted back there. He said when he got back there, the dog was terrified. Twice also they have come home and lights have been on that they know were out before they left. There is something in the holler up there. I don't know what it is. No one ever really believed much of anything I said as a kid, but I'm glad people are witnessing it now. I've got chill bumps typing this out. It honestly makes me emotional because this was my home for so long, and things are still happening. I live in this old house, and our closest neighbors are 10 minutes away. It may not be paranormal, seeing that nobody died or anything, but some really weird stuff has been happening lately. One time I was so sick that I had to skip school, but my parents still had to drop off my siblings, so I had to be home alone until they came back. On the second day of this happening, my parents were already gone, so I had the house to myself. I decided to make myself some breakfast first, but when I went into the kitchen, the medicine cupboard had everything thrown on the floor. The weird part was that it was locked. I phoned my mom asking if she had left it open, but she said she didn't touch the cupboard, and my dad said the same thing. I shrugged it off, thinking it was one of my siblings, and had my breakfast. I started texting my friend about what had happened when I heard a crash coming from upstairs. I tried to go upstairs, but I heard a knock on the door. I woke up late, so I wasn't that surprised to see my parents. After letting them in, I went upstairs to see what the crash was, and I saw that my sister's drone was on the floor. It was on the other side of where it was in the first place, so I was getting a little confused. I just went back downstairs and got on my phone for a bit. My parents left again a little while later to pick up my siblings. When they returned with them, I told my sister about the drone, and she didn't believe me. In the middle of the night, when I was half asleep, I heard a giggle from upstairs. In only 5 seconds, it turned into a maniacal laugh. I took my sleepy ass upstairs to tell my sister to shut the hell up because it was a girl's voice. She told me that she was asleep and heard it from her cupboard. She got a golf club and I got a bat, and we both carefully opened the door. Nobody was there, but we saw that all the clothes in the cupboard were off of their hangers. She decided to sleep with me for the night. It's a week later now, and I'm still creeped out. I live in France, in a village in the southeast, in a residence with my family. This residence was pretty cool at first, but it degenerated over time. We've been living here for 4 years, and when we came for the first time, the apartment looked interesting. We settled in after a while. We had problems with neighbors and we didn't know why. Over time, the neighbors forgot what happened except for one person. At that time, we didn't know how it was for the parking lot, and we parked for a few minutes in place of an old woman. This old woman had yelled at us that my grandfather was driving the car and that he was seriously ill, and we argued with her. Even now, she looks at us viciously and calls us scum. My grandfather being dead, I hate her even more. With regard to the deaths in this residence, there are more and more. Since the very beginning of 2020, there's already a dead person and a woman with whom we were friends with, who went to the hospital twice for an unknown reason. This woman draws tarot cards, and even before January 1st of 2020, she already felt ill, and became really unwell a few days later. The same day another person had died. Since we have been in this residence, there have been 5 to 9 deaths, either due to an accident or a serious illness. Now let's talk about the residence itself. Each time we enter the residence, we're upset for a completely unknown reason. From time to time, I hear groans or voices that come from nowhere. Well, I think this residence is quite strange. The other people who live here think the same thing, and I really don't know what to do. P.S. According to my grandmother, all the women in our family have gifts of clairvoyance, so me too, and I really find that the residence is haunted. I preface this encounter by saying simply, everything I describe is very real to me. Welcome to the stories of some of the scariest experiences of my life, and the woman with black hair in all white. Everything begins when I was in my early years of high school. My sister, quite a few years older than me, moved out of our home and into her first apartment. My mom was seeing someone new for the first time in a decade after her divorce from my father. My soon-to-be stepfather's children would soon have a room in our house, which was my sister's previously. It was the summer and I, a young teenager, often spent my late nights on the couch downstairs video chatting with friends on my laptop. On one particular night, it was about 2 a.m. and my friends and I had just disconnected our video call when I heard a peculiar noise at my feet. The sound most closely resembled nails scratching at the pillows. The sound most closely resembled nails scratching at the pillows that were near my feet. I was immediately filled with dread, and my legs began to grow colder. My laptop was on my chest, cutting off all view of my lower body. In fear of who or what I might see if I looked over or around my screen, I called my mother from upstairs. I was facing the stairs, and when she came halfway down them, out of bed, I asked her, "What's sitting by my feet?" She angrily replied, obviously since I had just woken her, "Nothing. What's the problem?" I felt better, but not enough to stay downstairs. I went upstairs and climbed into bed for the night. I always slept with the TV on and my door open. I fell asleep just fine, but was woken abruptly in the middle of the night. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was on. It took me a moment to realize what was happening, but I soon grasped that what the gang was doing was digging up a grave to steal the jewelry from a corpse, or something like it. I was too young to really appreciate the show. Soon after, the characters opened the uncovered coffin and the camera showed the rotting corpse, wearing a white dress. As the camera zoomed in on the rotting skull, my bedroom door slammed shut, and the same scratching sound from earlier grew loud on the pillow right beside my head. I pulled the blankets over my head and forced myself to fall asleep to escape the hell that I had found myself in. Some time passed with no further activity. I found myself in the hospital. My sister was giving birth to her first son. I started to tell the story to my aunt, who had lived in the old house as a kid. She explained that these sorts of things were in no way strange. I was perplexed. She described that when she was younger, a woman would often appear behind her at the top of the stairs. She described that my mother had seen the same woman as a child, but as an adult, never admitted it. Actually, whenever I brought it up, my mother only smiled lightly. I believe it was part of her coping process in order to continue to live in the house for many years to come. Soon after my sister got out of the hospital, I brought up the events to her. She was very calm and described that when she lived in the house, a woman in a white dress would come down from the attic, walk into her room, and stand there silently, staring at her. She described that the woman would always have long black hair draped over her face. My sister told me she would often ask the woman what she wanted, and after getting no response, would ask her to go away, which she respectfully did, returning to the attic. After this, perhaps it was just the fear of what I had been told, I always swore that I saw the same woman lingering throughout the house, always in the corner of my eye, drifting into my sister's old room. Later in the summer, there was a night when my family, which was now me, my mom, and my soon-to-be stepdad, were gathered downstairs in the living room. My mom asked if I could go upstairs and close my sister's old bedroom door, which was located at the end of the short hallway, so that the heat didn't draft into her vacant room, but rather into the 2 occupied bedrooms. I did as I was asked. When I approached the dark room, I reached my hand normally toward the knob. But as I touched the brass handle, things changed. The door flew shut in my face. Immediately, I thought that someone had broken into our home and was in my sister's room. I tried the knob several times, but the door was locked tight. I ran downstairs and explained what had happened, and that it was probably wise if we left the house and called the police. She didn't believe me at first and asked, laughing, that we go up and inspect the door. So I grabbed my Little League bat, and the 3 of us went to check it. Each of us pulled on the knob, and were unsuccessful. We heard movement from the room, and my mom and I went outside to wait in the car with the police on speed dial as we'll just say stepdad for ease, stepdad attempted to get into the room. Eventually, when nothing terrible had happened, we went back inside and approached the door once again. My mom, not believing in the ghost stories that had swirled through her home for generations, simply said, "All right, this is enough. Just open the door." As she reached for the knob, just that happened. The door swung open. I went inside, checking under the bed, behind the door, and in the closet, but finding nothing. My grandfather used to come visit us quite often before he passed. It was easy since he lived in the house he had built next door once he gave our house to my mother. He told me a story, although I couldn't tell if he was just messing with me, as he often did. He pointed to the large oak tree in the center of our backyard. He said that a long time ago, a man and a woman lived in the house. The husband had gone insane and killed his wife in there before going to the oak tree that stood right beside the one in our front yard and hung himself. He continued to say that they cut down the oak tree that the deed had been committed on, and they left the untainted one standing. What happened next, however, was too real. He took me for a walk behind his house into the woods. A few hundred yards into the woods was a seemingly ancient cemetery. He described that in that cemetery was where the woman was buried, while the man had been cremated. Really, I didn't think about this story as much as most probably would, maybe because it was the only thing that made concrete sense out of everything that had been happening. A lot more time passed with no significant events taking place. I had only told my best friend, Dan, one of the experiences. One night I planned to stay over at his house. We were much older at this point, juniors in high school, I believe, considering that we were driving. Still having an innate fear of the home that I lived in, especially being there alone, I asked him to come in with me to grab some clothes for the night. He came inside and followed me to the basement where my freshly dried shirts were. He started taunting. "Come out, spirits, come on. Don't be a bitch. Come out here." I explained to him, "Dan, the basement looks creepy, but everything bad in this house is upstairs. Please stop. You get to leave here and never come back. I have to try to sleep here." He seemed to understand, and didn't say anything as we climbed the stairs where all of my books and notebooks from the school year were presently stacked. However, when we went into my bedroom, he tried once more to get a glimpse at what I had been describing. As I knelt down to my lowest drawer to get a pair of socks, he began the taunting once more. As he stopped yelling, we heard a large crash from downstairs. "I told you," I said sadly. When we peered downstairs, we saw that all of the books had been thrown across the room. We didn't say anything to one another. We didn't try to clean up the mess. We just left. Years later, as I write this, the house has been seized by the bank in an equally complicated series of events. I live about 20 minutes from the old house as it sits, rotting. Sometimes I drive there and just sit in the driveway, staring into the upstairs window of my sister's old bedroom, wondering if there's a woman with dark hair staring back. Never once in my life did I go into the attic. The closest I ever came was when, one day, my sister and her now 2 boys were visiting. Her younger son and I were upstairs playing with trucks when suddenly he ran into the bathroom. Now the bathroom was where the steps to the attic were, which my mom had blocked off with several layers of plastic for whatever reason. I was terrified. He had run toward what I considered to be the lion's den. I approached the doorway that went to the stairs, which went to the attic. I peeked in and could barely make the child out in the darkness. He was at the top of the stairs, looking at the plastic, talking in his newly forming broken English to someone, something, that had called him to the stairway that he didn't know existed. In a rush of courage, I sprinted up the stairs, scooped him up, and shut the door behind me for the last time before we moved out. When I first moved into my house, about 11 years ago, a lot of strange things happened. About a week after my family moved in, I was home alone with my sister. She was in her room on the 2nd floor. I was whistling the national anthem on the 1st floor when I heard a deep, male-sounding voice hum along the 2nd floor. The humming was loud enough for me to hear over my whistling. My sister came out of her room because she heard it too. We freaked out, but eventually got over that. Fast forward a few weeks later, and every friend we had over asked us, my sister and I, when we got a cat. We didn't have a cat at that time. They all described this as a black cat that ran away when approached. My sister and I never saw this cat. A few months after that, my friends and I had a sleepover in the finished basement. In the middle of the night, the computer started blasting music. My friends and I all freaked out because A, that's a terrible way to wake up, and B, we knew we definitely turned it off before we went to sleep. One more example is my sister kept hearing knocking on her bedroom wall. Sometimes we would knock back, and the knocking would continue. It's been a while since anything has happened. Most of this occurred during the first 2 years we lived at this house. Do you think whatever spirits live here are more comfortable with us now? Do you think it's a good idea to try to communicate with whatever is at this house? Okay everyone, that's it for this video. Let me know what you thought of this latest collection of ghost stories down below in the comments section. I really hope you liked it, and if you did, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for me, and tap that notification bell to stay up to date on all the latest content. If you have your own horror story that you'd like to have featured on this channel, all of the contact links to do so are available in the video description, along with the links to my Ghost Stories playlist if you're interested in seeing more videos like this one, and that link will also appear at the end of this video as well if it hasn't already. I have been having such an awesome time bringing you guys this content, and as always, I look forward to bringing you so much more. Until then, this is K.E. Goodwin here at Undead Storyteller, signing off.